You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patriot and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. In June of 1777, the British Army, aiming to separate New England from the rest of the American colonies, initiated an ambitious plan under General John Burgoyne. Coming from Quebec, Burgoyne's strategy involved a two-front attack to take control of the Hudson Valley in New York. His own forces moved southward across Lake Champlain, while another group, led by St. Leger, was to push down the Mohawk Valley and join forces with Burgoyne near Albany. St. Leger commanded a diverse force of around 1,800 men. This group included British soldiers, specialized fighters from Kreutzburg's Jaeger Corps, Loyalists from the Royal Yorkers, members of the British Indian Department, and Indigenous warriors from several tribes such as the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Mohawk, and Mississauga. They started their journey at Lachine, moving up the St. Lawrence River to Lake Ontario's shore, then on to the Oswego River. In Oswego, they met up with British Indian Department Rangers from Fort Niagara, led by John Butler, and were joined by several hundred Indigenous warriors. This combined force made their way up the Oswego River and across Oneida Lake to reach the Oneida Carry. Upon arriving at the eastern end of this portage, they laid siege to Fort Stanwix, a key Continental Army position, starting on August 2nd. Nicholas Herkimer, the head of Tryon County's Committee of Safety, received an early alert about a potential British assault near the Mohawk River. On July 17th, he alerted the community about the possibility of military action and encouraged them to be ready to act. Then, on July 30th, Oneida allies informed him that the British forces were only 4 days away from Fort Stanwix, prompting Herkimer to call together local militia members. The group that assembled in response was composed of 800 militia members, mostly undertrained farmers of Palatine German heritage. They departed Fort Dayton on August 4th and established camp near the Oneida village of Oriskany the following day. Although some militia members lagged behind due to inadequate physical preparation, the group was reinforced by the addition of 60 to 100 Oneida warriors under the leadership of Han Yeri, a staunch supporter of the Patriot cause. That evening, Herkimer sent 3 messengers to the commander of Fort Stanwix, Colonel Peter Gansevoort, instructing him to fire 3 cannon shots as a signal of message receipt and to come out to meet Herkimer's forces. However, the messengers encountered difficulties in penetrating British lines and did not deliver their message until the next morning, after the battle had already commenced. Meanwhile, on August 5th, St. Leger, the British commander, found out about Herkimer's relief mission thanks to a message from Molly Brant to her brother Joseph Brant, who led a segment of St. Leger's Indigenous forces. That evening, St. Leger dispatched a group of light infantry from Sir John Johnson's Royal Yorkers to monitor Herkimer's progress towards Oriskany. Early the next morning, Joseph Brant and Butler moved forward with approximately 400 Indigenous warriors and rangers from the Indian Department. While many of these warriors were equipped with muskets, others carried traditional weapons such as tomahawks and spears. On the morning of August 6th, General Herkimer held a war council to discuss their next steps. Despite wanting to wait for a signal from the fort that never came, his officers pushed him to move forward, even accusing him of being a traitor because his brother was serving with the enemy. Hurt by these accusations, Herkimer agreed to march toward Stanwix. As they moved, about 6 miles from the fort, the road took a sharp dip into a marshy ravine, creating a perfect spot for an ambush. Seneca chiefs Sayenquerachta and Cornplanter, along with the Royal Yorkers and Iroquois warriors, hid, ready to attack the column as it passed. The plan was to stop the column's head and then attack along its length. But, as fate would have it, the ambush was triggered too soon. Despite this, the Patriots were caught off guard. Colonel Ebenezer Cox was immediately killed, and not long after, Herkimer was severely injured, but he bravely refused to leave the battlefield, instead directing and encouraging his men while leaning against a tree. The early trigger of the ambush meant some of Herkimer's men hadn't yet entered the ravine and in panic fled, leaving a trail of casualties. Only about half of Herkimer's forces were still in the fight 30 minutes in. Some attackers used the flash of muskets to time their tomahawk charges. In a notable moment, Oneida leader Louis Akiaton Haronquin made a precise and crucial shot that took down an enemy threatening their ranks. Eventually, Herkimer's force managed to push through, reaching better ground. John Johnson, seeing their resilience, sought reinforcements. A thunderstorm paused the battle, during which Herkimer skillfully reorganized his men for defense. Meanwhile, Butler gathered intelligence from captives. When the battle resumed, with additional Royal Yorker reinforcements disguised to look like they were from the fort, the ruse was quickly discovered, leading to fierce close combat among former neighbors. This account underscores the chaos, bravery, and complex dynamics of historical battles, highlighting strategic decisions, moments of valor, and the personal cost of conflict. Around 11 in the morning, messengers arrived at the fort to inform Colonel Gansevoort of the situation. In response, he ordered a raid. Lieutenant Colonel Marinus Willett took command of 250 men and led a surprise attack on the nearly empty camps to the south. They encountered very few people there, mostly women, and managed to capture 4 prisoners. The raiders also seized blankets and various personal items from the indigenous people's camps and even took letters and documents from John Johnson's camp. During this raid, one of the warriors who was supposed to be guarding the camps ran off to the battlefield to warn the others of the attack. This triggered a retreat with warriors calling out, "Una, una!" the Seneca call to fall back. They rushed to defend their camps and the few individuals left there, forcing the smaller groups of German soldiers and loyalist fighters to pull back as well. During a fierce battle, General Herkimer was gravely injured, and amidst heavy losses, his remaining forces had to pull back to Fort Dayton. Sadly, after an unsuccessful surgery to amputate his leg, Herkimer passed away on August 16th. The indigenous fighters were able to recover most of their fallen by the next day, but the battlefield was left strewn with the bodies and the injured of the Patriot side. When Benedict Arnold and his troops arrived weeks later, they were greeted by a harrowing sight and a terrible smell from the aftermath of the battle. Upon hearing about the setback at Oriskany, General Philip Schuyler swiftly arranged for more help to be sent. Arnold's group reached Fort Stanwix on August 21st. Using a clever ruse, Arnold's messengers persuaded the British and their indigenous allies laying siege to the fort that they were up against a much larger force. This trickery led the besiegers to call off their siege and retreat. In September 1777, the British saw an opportunity to strengthen their forces by authorizing John Butler of the British Indian Department to assemble a regiment which would later be known as Butler's Rangers. This unit was primarily formed from fighters who had seen action at Oriskany. After the siege was lifted, many of these loyalist troops either went back to Fort Niagara or Montreal, or they joined up with Burgoyne's campaign along the Hudson, with considerable support from warriors of various tribes. The aftermath of the battle sparked significant division among the Iroquois. For the first time, the Confederacy found itself battling internally, with the Mohawks, Senecas, Cayugas, Onondagas, and some Oneidas siding with the British. In response to a council's decision, a violent message was sent to the Oneidas, allied with the Patriots. This led to raids between the groups, with the Oneida settlement of Oriskany being targeted by Brant's Mohawks, who in turn faced Oneida raids on their strongholds. The ongoing conflict resulted in many Mohawks relocating to Quebec. During the conflict, some Patriots were captured by Indigenous warriors. While several were handed over to the British, others faced torture and death. Dr. Moses Younglove, a Patriot taken prisoner, accused the British and Loyalists of complicity in these acts, alleging cannibalism. However, Canadian historian Gavin Watt has critically examined these accounts, labeling them as exaggerated and unreliable. This battle ranks as one of the most brutal in terms of how many people were hurt or killed, with around half of Herkimer's troops and 15% of the Loyalist forces suffering casualties. Despite these losses, St. Leger's blocking of the Patriot relief column could be seen as a victory for him. Yet, the Patriot troops didn't leave the battlefield, even after the Loyalists pulled back, partially thanks to the successful attack on the Indigenous camps that might have saved Herkimer's forces from total destruction. After the battle, there was a notable drop in morale among the British's Indigenous allies. They had expected the British to lead the fight, but found themselves at the forefront instead. To make matters worse, some lost their personal items during a surprise attack by the Patriots. This disappointment played a role in the failure of St. Leger's campaign. Governor Blacksnake, reflecting on the battle years later, vividly described the horror with his words, "Thought at that time the blood shed a stream running down on the descending ground." In 1883, to honor this significant battle, a monument was erected at the coordinates 43 degrees 10.6 minutes north, 75 degrees 22.2 minutes west. Today, the battlefield has been preserved as the Oriskany Battlefield State Historic Site, earning recognition as a National Historic Landmark in 1962 and joining the National Register of Historic Places in 1966. Furthermore, the town of Herkimer, New York, and Herkimer County are named after the influential Herkimer. The battle's legacy continued with the naming of the aircraft carrier USS Oriskany, launched in 1945 and now serving as an artificial reef, and the issuance of a commemorative postage stamp in 1977. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.